will be principally based on web prototyping. So I want you to get all the activities on that topic out of the way, so then you can concentrate on your main piece of assessment. Okay, so now as you have seen, the marks for the first 10 activities have been released. So 36 students have passed all the activities so far. So they've reached 40%, and therefore they have already passed the module. So congratulations. I don't know if most of the 36 are in this room or not. Well done. You will sleep better from now on. Another piece of statistics which is not as good is that 37 students have passed fewer than half of the activities, so they have a mark which is below 20%, which means that they are really at risk of failing the module because they didn't perform sufficiently well in the first part. If they carry on that, they will just fail the module. And as we can expect, the initial activities are a bit easier than the one of the second semester, so it's not looking good for them. So there are still 60% up for grabs, so there's still possibility to react, but it's really one of the last opportunities. Therefore, if you are in this situation, or if you know someone in that situation, I would ask you or them to contact me and to have a chat with me to look at what is the best strategy to catch up. Because, I mean, some people didn't do well because of lack of dedication, but some people didn't do well because of external events. It's not their fault, and by having a chat with me, we may find a strategy in order to allow them to come back on track and eventually pass the module. Activity 11, so that was the database one. So I've got 52 submissions, which is reasonable, and I was very pleased by the quality of them. As written, most of you who submitted got it correct enough. It's not 100% perfect, but it doesn't need to be. You got the main concept, you understood what it was about, and you did the work. So well done again. Obviously, there are still 140 students who haven't submitted yet, but there are still 3 weeks, so hopefully we will catch up. A few questions I got. I didn't get many questions because I think it's quite straightforward. You need to get your hands a bit dirty, do the things, but I don't think that it's technically difficult. Just follow the instruction and eventually you complete it successfully. So one comment was people were quite pleased to learn about databases, investigating their blog, and they want to go to the next step, which is using MySQL, and that's the topic of today. So I will have a happy student, hopefully, by the end of the lecture. I had a student who asked me how to remove the primary key. So they built a table, they made maybe some mistake in the primary keys field, they tried to change it and didn't manage. Obviously, since I don't know what system they are using, I cannot answer very precisely. But as you know, we are using relational databases, and somehow a table is not valid if there is no primary key. Because if you don't have links between tables, it's not relational. Therefore, we can imagine some environment which will say, oh, if you remove the primary key, it's not a valid table anymore, So I don't allow you to remove the primary key. So there should be maybe another strategy to get rid of it. Also, some systems, very often you associate the primary key with auto-increment property. And some systems don't allow you to remove the primary key before you have removed the auto-increment property first. Okay, so that's maybe a way of solving the problem. Obviously, as I said, it depends on the system you are using. So if you still cannot remove it, I guess the best thing to do is speak to your mentor. You got an email from your mentor telling you about the surgery hours. I think there are roughly 2 hours every day of the week. So you have quite a lot of support for that. So some people rightly are concerned about security because we start moving data from databases. Those data may be sensitive. People may be listening to them or trying to alter that. So obviously, you need to deal with security at some point, but it's not going to be within the IT Toolbox module. I mean, you will have some specific lectures on databases and PHP and so on. So there, obviously, the stress will be on security. Here in IT Toolbox, it's more an introduction, and we are not going to go in depth in that important concept, but it's important. Okay, so within the exercises we do and the website we are building, don't put stuff which is too sensitive because at the moment it's not fully safe. Okay, so let's start with a new material about MySQL. So first of all, what is SQL? Stands for Structured Query Language. And as we have seen, it's one of the most common language in commercial databases systems, management systems. Initially, it was called SQL, so Structured English Query Language. And that was defined by IBM already a long time ago, in the mid-70s. Remember, we said that the relational database concept was of the early 70s, so SQL followed and started an implementation of that. So it's called SQL. It was called SQL, and now it has moved to SQL. But some people are still calling SQL SQL. Okay, so don't be surprised. You may hear the two names. Why has the name changed? Simply because of some story of copyright. Apparently there was a company called SQL, which was not that happy to have a language called after it, so they had to change it to SQL. So SQL means Structured Query Language, but actually SQL is more than that. It's not just about making queries, so looking for information in your database and getting reports. It's also allow you to create your database itself, okay, and administrate your database. So it's a bit more than the name would suggest. So standardization started in the 80s, and the current standard is SQL 2011, which looks a bit old, but actually very few systems are using pure SQL. Now, all the database systems have some kind of flavor of SQL. We are going to look at MySQL today. So they do more than what the standard SQL is doing. So standard SQL is still a bit behind 2011, but the implementation of that standard is much more advanced. Okay, so last week we looked at what are the most popular engine for databases. So here we have the same list. So I would like to highlight the ones which are SQL based. So number one is Oracle, which is not SQL based. Then we have MySQL. So that's the open source one that we will be studying. Third one is Microsoft SQL. Fifth one is PostgreSQL. DB2 is the IBM version of SQL. We have even some SQLite. Okay, so you can see that out of the 10, we have already 5 which are based on SQL. So by learning MySQL, you will be pretty good in the other system as well. You just look at them as maybe dialect, small differences. If you look not at the ranking anymore, but at the percentage of use, so all this percentage can be added, you know, to see the world of database queries. And if we do the total, we reach 47%. And then there are also these 18%, which are not specified, and many of them are SQL based as well. Okay? So I think it's safe to say that more than 50% of the databases in the world are running some type of SQL dialect. Okay? So by studying MySQL, you are really dealing with the leader of that SQL family, and you will be using your skills in these other systems as well. So what are the differences between MySQL and SQL? So first of all, MySQL, as I said, is based on the standard SQL, so you are not going to see a very big difference. The main difference is that MySQL is doing more than what SQL offers. So it either extends some functions or adds some completely new functions. So MySQL, as we know, is open source. So initially it was not aimed at huge commercial applications. So it was aimed at medium-sized database, and for the big systems, you had to use the market leader Oracle. So when we say medium size is still pretty big, we are speaking about 10 to 100 millions of rows. So you can have a table with a size of hundreds of megabytes. So that was the aim of the system. However, through the years, it has developed, extended, and whereas in the past we were dealing with hundreds of megabytes, now it's dealing happily with terabytes of data. And whereas in the past it was for small computer systems, now it's fine if you are using handheld and embedded devices. Okay. So maybe initially they were not too ambitious, but with the extensions now, it's really a system which can do most of your database applications. Okay, so it's not anymore a small database system, it's a large professional database system which is competing with Oracle. Okay, so you know that it's a relational database system, and the simple definition for relational database systems is it's a collection of tables, and we have these connections between tables through the primary keys. So as you remember, the tables as columns, you have fields, and as rows, you have the individual records of your table. And the fields as what is describing an object, a record. So typically your address, phone number, name, and so on. And the primary key, which is one of those fields, is a unique identifier, which makes sure that when you connect databases, you point towards a single record and don't get lost. Okay, so as we said, SQL and MySQL are query languages. So how do you query a table? So obviously we are not going to go through all the command of MySQL, but you will see it's quite intuitive. You have some basic concept to understand. We are going to go through the main ones, and if you need more, obviously you will find all the information you need from the net. But I think once you get started, it's quite intuitive. Okay, so here we have a table. So we have our primary key, an ID, a number. Then we have the last name, first name, address, and city. And then here is our first query. So select. So the capital letters show you the MySQL keywords. Select last name from persons. So what do you think the outcome of that command is going to be? So persons is the table. Okay. So here you are specifying that you are working with a specific table. Yeah.
It's just the last name column.
Yeah. So basically, the output that you would expect is this column and nothing else. Okay. And as you could have predicted or guessed, that's the outcome you get. Okay. So you can see that the queries are quite easy to understand. Once you have started using them, it's becoming straightforward. Obviously, a database has several tables. Okay, so that's why when you are doing your query with select, you have to specify which of those tables you are going to be interrogating. However, your system may have different databases as well. Okay, so which means that before interrogating a table, first you have to select which database you are going to be using. Okay, so if we look at your website, in principle you have the database which is linked to your blog. You have the database that I asked you to do last week. So you have already two databases, at least, you may have others. So before starting integrating a table, first you have to specify which database you will be using. And the command is just use. So use followed by the name of the database. So quite straightforward. A piece of detail which is very important is after each MySQL query, you need a semicolon at the end. Okay. Otherwise, it's not going to interpret what you have written. Okay, so that was just a simple example. Here are a few more commands. So as we said, MySQL has two sides. One is to manipulate the data into your database. So it's called the data manipulation language. So you have the command select. that we have seen to extract data from your database. You have update, delete, and insert. So all that has to do with editing the data in your database. So that's what you would expect from a query language, such type of commands. However, we said that that MySQL was doing a bit more than a query language. It's also allow you to create or delete your database. So for example, what you did last week, you didn't use MySQL to create your tables. You should use some kind of interface. But in practice, you could do it by MySQL as well. Okay. So you will have create table, alter table, drop table, create index, drop index. So all these things that you have done using the interface of your system, you could do it with MySQL. So that's called the data definition commands. Okay, so if you want to create a table, you are going to use create table. So not a big surprise here. You have to name your table, obviously. So here we are going to call it students. And then you have the different fields that you want to have in your database. So you want some number, which will be your primary key. So this number is going to be, for example, integer. You are going to specify that this cannot be null, okay, because you must have a value in your primary key field. Otherwise, your table will never you will be able to recover the data from that field. So you enforce that by saying not null. So which means that if you are trying to that automatically is going to put a value there, and how is this value going to be put? Using what is called auto increment. Okay, because one way is each time you enter a record, you enter the primary key as well, but which means that you have to record what is the latest primary key you had, or you allow the system to do it automatically, and each time you have a new record, it adds 1 to the previous value. So in that way, you are sure that the values are different. So in our field, the first field is this primary key. Obviously, you want to have the first name, and in that case, we are going to say that it's a string of character. So in MySQL, the type is called varchar, and we are going to put a limit of 48 characters. Hopefully, that will be enough. Usually, there are issues with students from Sri Lanka who have very beautiful and long names, and sometimes 48 can be a bit limiting. So you need to be aware of what type of students you have to deal with that. Last name, similarly, we are going to say it's a string of characters, and again you are going to set a limit. You can have some kind of ID, another type of ID, which would be an integer. You can have an email address, which is again a string of characters, and you have to set again the length. And you have to specify out of those fields which one is going to be your primary key. Okay. So in this case, you just say my primary key is the field none. And then you add your semicolon. Okay. So when you are typing in MySQL, the MySQL interface, you can go to a new line, but that's not going to affect the understanding of your commands. For MySQL, all that is a single command. The fact that it's on different line doesn't matter. What is important is the semicolon. The semicolon tells you that's the end of my comment, that's what I'm going to send as a query. Okay? And when you send that, that command, MySQL is going to tell you if it's a valid command or not. So we'll return something like query OK. Usually it tells you how many rows are affected by your commands. Okay. So here we are creating an empty table. So there is no row affected. Okay. There is no record which is affected because there is no record in that table. And it tells you how fast, a bit of showing off, it managed to process that query. Obviously, before creating a table, you need to have created a database. Okay. And the command, again, which is straightforward, is just create database, and you can give it a sensible name as well, like KUadmin. Okay, so imagine, we have now created that table, and we would like to see the structure of that table. That was one of the questions I had for the previous activity. Create a table and show me how this table looks like. So there is a command which is called describe. So if you type describe and the name of the table, it's going to show you how it looks like. Okay. So we'll have all the different fields, the type. So we have seen that we have the integer and the characters, and what is the length in each type. You remember for the primary key, we said we don't want an empty value. It's not acceptable. So here, the null field shows us which of the fields cannot be null. The key field tells us which of those fields have been chosen as the primary key. Is there a default value? And some extra information is, in the case of the primary key, we specified that it should be auto-incremented each time you have a new record. A new ID will be created automatically. Okay, so now that we have our table, we have created a database, we have created a table. Now we need to start populating that table and adding some values. So in order to insert new data in your table, you just use the insert into command. Okay. So again, all the names are very straightforward. So once you have started playing with them, everything is quite sensible. So you insert into your table student the following values. Okay. And so for each of the fields, you have to specify a value. So the first one is the primary key. You remember the ID. So in this case, the system is going to do the incrementation automatically. So you are not going to put any value. So we just write null, and the system will understand, okay, there's no value. It must be a value, and the way of having a value is to do the auto-incrementation, so the system is doing it for you. And then you have your first name, your surname, some other type of ID, and an email address. And at the end, you have your semicolon, telling that it's the end of your command. And again, it's telling you that the query has been understood, there's no error. That in this case, one row has been affected, because you have added one row, and it was very quick, to process that that command. So now we have a table.
Can you add another line after values with another values thing? So it adds another one as well. Because it's now. So it auto implements the
another. So you want to add two.
You want to put semicolon on the executes, isn't it?
yeah, before.
Yeah, because when you put the semicolon, it executes.
Yeah.
See, I think we could do it as 2 separate lines of code.
Yeah.
I think it's
I mean, usually use separate lines because when you are filling up, the databases, usually you are using like HTML forms, so people are filling up all the values, submit, and in the background you are going to run that type of MySQL command. Obviously, if you want to transfer from one database to another, you are going to use other type of commands for a bulk copy from one system to another. So now we have created a database, we have created a table with the right structure. We were able to see the structure of that table. We have added a record. So now we can start interrogating our database. So we could go back to our select from command. So in this case, I'm using the star sign. I guess you are familiar with the star sign already. Been used quite a lot in different languages or systems, which means everything. Okay. So basically, you want to see everything inside the database, the table called students. And here is your display. And again, it tells you that there's only one row, how fast it was able to process your query. Here we can add another prestigious student in our database. So you can see that automatically the ID has been incremented. So making sure that the two students have different IDs. And again, if we use select star for students, everything is going to be displayed. Obviously, select star is good, but our screens have limited sizes and you may have many fields. So you want to be very often more specific. Okay. So you want, for example, to extract only name and surnames of students. So you just provide, after select, the names of the different fields of interest. And again, when you run your commands, you are getting what you would expect. Queries can be more and more complicated. Okay, so you can add some extra conditions when you are making a query using the where clause. Okay, so you are selecting a specific field or all the fields from a given table, but you are looking for specific values. Okay, so typically, for example, you are looking for a student which in this case is named Bond, and it's going to show you all the fields associated to that specific student. Okay, so that's what we do almost every day. When a student contacts us, tell us that they have issues with their marks and stuff, we go on the Kingston University database system and we do a query recovering all the marks of a given student. And that would be a command which is similar to that one. And obviously you can retrieve everything about a student or only very specific fields. In this case, the student ID and their email address. So these commands were query commands, adding values, records in your database, and retrieving information from your database. So that's what a query language is supposed to do. But as we said, MySQL does a little bit more. It allows you to do the database and the table management as well. So you may have a database and decide to add a new field. Okay. So a few years ago, Twitter didn't exist, so there was no reason to record Twitter accounts of students. Now, many students have a Twitter account. That may be a suitable way of contacting them. The university may decide that now recording their Twitter account can be an important information. Okay. So the way of doing that is to use the alter table statement. Okay. And this, so as you can guess again, is for changing the format of your table. And you can decide if you want to add some new fields or remove some new fields. Again, we are in this world of technology where things are appearing regularly and things are disappearing very often as well. Nowadays, most people will have a Facebook account, but the first big social network was not Facebook, was MySpace. Okay, so we could imagine that five years ago, the university had your MySpace account in their database. Nowadays, it's not really relevant anymore. You have seen what has happened to Friends United, Reunited. Again, one of the first social networks, which has closed now. So things are very dynamic. So when we look at technology, we feel that they are going to be here forever, you know. But even Facebook one day will disappear. So, and you are the one who need to monitor those trends. Okay. If you are going to work on social media, obviously at this time of the day, you need to be proficient in Facebook, but you need to monitor who is going to be the next one, because there will be a next one. Okay, so in this case, we are going to use our initial table students, and we are going to add a new field. And for example, we are going to get the date of registration of the student. And so that variable could be called date but the type of that variable is a type date in capital letter. Okay, so that's a MySQL keyword. Date is a specific format for data as well. We have already seen the characters and the integers. So date is another of those formats. Okay, so we add this new field in our table. Since this table had 2 records, all of those records has been affected by this new field, and at the moment there is no value inside those fields. So if we do a select all for students, now we can see that the field date has been added. So obviously we have what is called the update statement. Initially we were entering the values, all the values in one go, in one record. now we want to add some specific information here or there. It can be a new mark for a student, or it can be this value that has been, which is required for this new field. So again, the syntax is quite straightforward. You update a table, in this code, which is students. What you want to add is for the field date. You want to give this value. So you need to have a look at how dates are formatted. So you have all these problems between the American way and the British way with dates, which order about months, and here they find somehow some kind of compromise. You do it, you read it from right to left, so maybe influenced by Middle East scripts. So first the year, then the month, then the day. And obviously you need to know where you are going to add this value or change this value. So the safest way is to use the primary key, because in that case you are certain that you will only deal with one record. But sometimes you want to add a date to all your previous records. Okay, the database didn't have, you didn't record it, so you don't know what the values was. Now you are starting recording it, so you want to differentiate between the new students which have the data and the previous students. So maybe you can put some data in the past, which is they were recorded at least, or they registered at least at that date, and all those students without a record are assigned that date. So that can be another strategy. And so here, since we are using the command where, we are looking at specific records. Since we are using the primary key, we are obviously looking at a single record. So when you run that command, obviously only one row is going to be changed. And here is the outcome as you would expect. Obviously, you can add data, you can edit data, and you can delete data. Okay. So if a student has decided, for example, to leave the university and doesn't want their record to be kept, we can use the delete statement. Again, we have to specify the table and something which describes the student. I think here the choice of using the surname may not be a very good idea, because you can have more than one student, which is called bond. Okay. So maybe using the ID, the primary key, would have been a much better choice. Or maybe you want to get rid of all the bond families, because for some reason. But I mean, here we are playing. Okay, it's more about using different type of syntax and do what you want, and check that you understand how to use them. There are many other commands. Okay, so you have the command show tables. So again, you can guess what it's doing. It's going to give you all the tables, the list of all the tables which are defined within a certain database. You have alter table, we have seen already, with the command here, drop. So drop is to remove a whole field from your table. So here in that specific case, we remove the field email. And that's possibly what the university did with the field MySpace a few years ago. You can also drop a whole table, and in that case, you are not only losing all the information which is inside the table, it means the records, but you are also losing the table itself, its definition. You know, the table was built according to a certain number of fields. If you drop the table, everything is lost. Okay, so you need to be careful when you are using the drop commands. Yeah.
If it's got fields that are linked to other tables, but delete the data from the fields in the other tables as well, or will it maintain those?
So yeah, that will be a problem.
So does it delete everything, then, including something in other tables?
No, it's not going to. No, because in your table you will just have primary keys from other tables. Okay. So you are not touching the data of other tables. However, other tables were maybe linked to your table. So when you had the class table, classroom table, you had links to the different IDs of the students, maybe. So if you remove the table with all the students, then those links are pointing to nothing. Okay. So that can be a serious problem. So the difference between delete and drop is that drop remove your table and remove its definition, so it doesn't exist anymore. If you use delete, it's only removing all the records which are in that table, but keep its structure. Okay. Still, delete is a dangerous command which can harm your system. So usually when you are using delete, you are going to be a bit more specific. You are not going to delete everything in a table. You will select specific records or a group of records. So we have already seen the command where, and in the previous examples we are just touching one field. Now we can see that we can have more advanced requirements. We may decide to delete all students which will register before a given date, for example, or between two dates, or in that case with ID numbers, primary keys between 5 and 10. Okay. So as you can see, you can have quite advanced specifications after the where statement. Obviously, another very important command is help, and that will tell you, provide you the link to the help of the different commands, and if you help with a keyword, it will give you a specific help about that keyword. So that's the world of MySQL. Okay, so that was just an introduction, a taster. But I think you have all the basics already. You can create a database. You can create tables. You can enter information. You can edit that information. And you can interrogate your tables. Okay, so most of the commands are there. Obviously, your queries can become a bit more complicated with more logic. Okay, you want to retrieve all the students during that time, whose mark is above that number, and whose module is this one. You can have some very complex requests, but all the basics are there. So how do you use MySQL? So one way is to use a MySQL interpreter. So the environment you have bought for your website allow you to enter MySQL commands, and you get this information. But you may want to use MySQL in a programmatic way. Okay? So you are writing a piece of code, and you want dynamically your piece of code to retrieve information from a database, edit that information, and so on. Okay. And one programming language which allows you to do that is PHP. Okay. That we have seen before the break. So as you remember, you can write web pages with suffix PHP. And PHP is not a language which is understood by your web browser. So it needs to be interpreted by the server, which holds the PHP pages. And so in order to interpret it, it has what is called a PHP preprocessor. And as we saw, you want to retrieve a PHP page, which has some PHP functions. The PHP preprocessor is going to run those functions, calculates the outcome of those functions, and these outcomes are going to be written in an HTML file. And eventually it's that HTML file which is sent to you. So you have no knowledge about how the data were calculated. You ask for a PHP page and you get an HTML page where all the places where PHP was trying to calculate or retrieve information is replaced by the actual values. Okay. So this PHP preprocessor can obviously do some calculations using your functions, but if your functions has to do with interrogating a database, collecting information for a database, editing a database, it can do it as well. Okay, so you want the database server to be where the web server is. If you have some commands which are going to interact with the database, everything is going to be done on the server, retrieve the information, do what you want, and then send you HTML file with those values. Okay? So you can use MySQL with PHP. And PHP has a class of extensions, function extensions, which are doing MySQL queries. So it starts with a suffix, which is called MySQL I. It's because it's extended MySQL. You had initially the MySQL functions, now you have the MySQL I. And when you are going to work with a database using PHP, the first thing you have to do is to connect to that database. Okay? So you need to provide the address of the server, a username, and a password. So you are going to send that query, and if it's successful, you will get access to the database. So once you have access first to your server, you have to select one database. As we said, we may have several databases on one server. As we discussed earlier, you have already at least two. The one from your blog and the one you created last week. And then, now that you have chosen a database, you can run any MySQL query. Okay? So you just called these PHP functions, so MySQL I query, and inside you put your standard MySQL query. Okay? So the only difference with a standard MySQL query is that you don't put the semicolon. Since you are using PHP, it understands that each time you call MySQL I query, there is a single command inside the bracket. Okay. So somehow the semicolon would be redundant. And when you have finished working with a server holding databases, you just call MySQL close, and you have a clean disconnection from your server. So as you can see, using MySQL with PHP is pretty straightforward. Once you know about how to write queries in MySQL, you can just integrate them in PHP, and using roughly 4 PHP functions, you can do all your work with MySQL. Okay, so let's look at an example. So let's look at the second page first. So we have always seen during our PHP class how to use a form, okay, an HTML form. So here you are going to create a form, okay, the same way that we did it in the past. And while in the past we were using the information on the fly, someone were entering data, and you had a small function doing some calculation about using those data. So typically you did these currency converters or imperial to metric converters. So you created one of those forms, and the other part of your web page was doing some calculation and providing you the outcome. In this case, what you are going to do, you are going to collect the information which has been submitted on that form, and you are going to store them in your database. Okay? So, as we have seen before, we are going to use MySQL Connect. So obviously you need to know the passwords and the name of your server. You need to know obviously the name of the table you want to update. And then you are going to use the SQL command insert into a table. And here are the different fields which use the values entered in the form by the user. Okay. So all that is preparing, if you want, the query. And now you just apply MySQL I query with the string of character, which is your whole MySQL command. And that execute your query. And then in order to close everything nicely, you call MySQL close. And then obviously you can have some messages telling you that everything has been recorded properly. So you can see that recording data in a database can be really straightforward. You have a form, the user is entering the value, you are catching those values using a simple piece of code like this one, connect to a database, connect to a server, select a database, use the right table, and then insert those values in that table. Obviously, you can do the same thing in a retrieve mode. Okay, so you can have a form in which says what is the name of the student you would like information about. The user enter the name of the student, and you open your database, interrogating the right tables, and look for the values associated with this name using the where select and the where comment. Okay, so you can see that already you can build a user-friendly environment for people to use a database, because the general public doesn't want to do MySQL commands. Okay, they just want to click button. I want to retrieve the marks for a student and enter the name of the student. Obviously, by using MySQL, you are completely free. Any possible request can be created. If you have a system with a set of menus, you are limited by what the developer has thought. Okay, so is that clear? Yeah, how you can connect MySQL to PHP. So now let's have a look at activity 12. So it's building on activity 11. So activity 11, you have been using the interface to explore the information on your blog. This time, you are going to use MySQL commands. Okay. You will have a little quiz to learn new commands and new things, which allow you to do a bit of research on MySQL. And then I will ask you to edit, using MySQL, the database you created in activity 11. Okay? So the first part, you are going to do some, you are going to interrogate the database of your blog with MySQL, but you are just going to read values. You are not going to mess with it. Okay? And I don't want you to break your blog, because some people are using it seriously, have a lot of records and so on. So I don't want you to start doing errors in MySQL and all your blog is dead. Okay? So in this part, we will limit ourselves with functions like select. Okay? So we are just reading, interrogating values. We are not changing anything. So if there is an error, nothing happens. Okay? Just tell you your command is not valid, try again. Okay? The second part, I want you to enter some new values in a database. So we are not going to touch the precious blog. We are going to use the toy database you created last week. Okay? And if everything is broken, it's not a big deal, you can do it again. Okay? So I think that's why it's a bit hands-on again. Okay, so you will be practicing your MySQL. In this activity, we are not going to use PHP. Okay, that's another level, and we'll be exploring that in your web prototyping coursework. Okay, so in the activities we don't go that far, but if you want a good mark in your web prototyping coursework, I would be expecting you collecting data through a form, copying them into a database, and retrieving data as well. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And I think next week that will be pushback coming. So you will see a different face.